Chapter-2. The Guru and his family. Bizarre, yes, but that should not blind us to his loving care for his devotees and the spiritual development he brought about in them, nor to the love and devotion they felt for him. It will perhaps be best, therefore, to open this chapter with a statement of this by one of his devotees, Mrs. Manger, which she has already referred to, I've already referred to. One's first impression of Sai Baba was of his eyes. There was such power and penetration in his gaze that no one could long look him in the eyes. One felt that he was reading one through and through. Soon one lowered one's eyes and bowed down. One felt that he was not only in one's heart, but in every atom of one's body. A few words or a gesture would reveal to one that Sai Baba knew all about the past and present, and even the future, and about everything else. There was nothing else to do but to submit trustfully and surrender oneself to him. And he was there to look after every minute, minute detail and guide one through every vicissitude of life. It is his love and protection, the spiritual exaltation of his presence, that she emphasizes. As she said, it was not merely his power that endeared him to his devotees. His loving care combined with his powers to make Shirdi a veritable paradise to those devotees who went there. Directly we arrived there, we felt safe, she said, that nothing could harm us. When I went and sat in his presence, I always forgot my pain, and indeed the body itself and all mundane cares and anxieties. Hours would pass while I sat blissfully unaware of their passage. It was an extraordinary experience, shared, I feel, by all his real devotees. For he was all in all, and the all for us. Another devotee, Y.J. Galwankar, speaks especially of the purifying nature of Sai Baba's influence when he said, "I first visited Sai Baba in 1911. I went because my father-in-law and other relatives were going. I had heard of Sai Baba's saintliness, but was not at the time seriously drawn to seek either spiritual or temporal benefits from him. I visited him in this way 4 or 5 times, and my interest gradually increased. Then he appeared to me in a dream and asked me for 2 rupees. On waking, I decided to pay this and sent 2 rupees to him at Shirdi by money order. In the same dream, he gave me 2 valuable instructions. First, to behave with probity and integrity, and secondly, to maintain chastity. I have observed these instructions with care and zeal. Once after this, when I went to Shirdi about 1917, Baba put his hand over my head, and this had a strange effect on me. I forgot myself and my surroundings and fell into a state of ecstasy. I learned afterwards that while I was in that state, Sai Baba was telling those present that I was characterized by integrity and purity. He described to them various forms and conditions that I had passed through in previous lives, and said that he had placed me in my mother's womb in this birth, and I had still retained my integrity and purity. The demand for 2 rupees was a form of symbolism, much used by Sai Baba. He was demanding the 2 coins of purity and integrity. Sometimes Baba appeared to people in dreams or visions to draw them to him. Always it is the master who draws his followers, although it may appear to be their decision or to be mere chance that one is chosen and another not. Sai Baba was explicit about this when he said, "I draw people to me from long distances in many ways. It is I who seek them out and bring them to me. They do not come of their own accord. Even though they may be thousands of miles away, I draw them to me like a bird with a string tied to its foot." Many, of course, went merely because of the stream of miracles, in hope of worldly benefits. Some such, however, gradually developed a craving for the higher wealth that Sai Baba distributed, when he said, "My people first come to me for temporal benefits, but when these are obtained, they begin to follow me." One devotee, seeing the motley crowd assembled there, asked Sai Baba whether all of them derived benefit, a question that might be asked of any master whose destiny it is to be publicly known. For reply, he pointed to a mango tree in blossom and said, "What a splendid crop it would be if all the blossoms turned into fruit. But do they? Most of them fall off. Very few remain." R.B. Purandar was one of the blossoms that ripened into fruit. He has left an account of his first coming when he said, "I first heard of Sai Baba in 1909 and went to see him. I went with no worldly motives, though I was poor and an orphan. I was always desirous of associating with sadhus and felt drawn to him because I had heard that he was a saint. He appeared to me in a dream and summoned me to Shirdi. At the time, my daughter was about 6 months and very ill, so my mother objected to my going. Nevertheless, I persisted and took my mother and wife and the child with me. I stayed there for 13 days, and on the 3rd day the child recovered from her sickness. Baba did not allow me to go back until the 13th day. I did not ask him about anything, but he told my mother that he had been connected with me for 7 centuries and would never forget me, however far away I was, and would not eat a morsel of food without me. With Baba's permission, I left for Nasik and from there returned to our home at Dadar. On arrival there, my wife got an attack of cholera, and the doctor gave her up as hopeless. Then I saw Sai Baba standing beside the little temple opposite my house, and he told me to give her the udi, the sacred ashes, that I had brought back from Shirdi. I did so, and within half an hour she recovered sufficient warmth for the doctor to be hopeful, and soon she was all right. Some, of course, arrived without faith just to see what the strange wonder-worker looked like. One was an Anglo-Indian station master from a nearby town. On arrival, he found Sai Baba washing out mud pots and placing them mouth downwards on the ground. He asked him why he was doing that, and Baba replied with caustic humor, referring to unreceptive listeners, "Pots come to me like that, mouth downwards." Deshpande, a devotee to whom there will be frequent reference, tells of an uncle of his who did not at first believe. Several times he went to see for himself, but Sai Baba threw stones at him and would not even let him come near the mosque. On other occasions, Sai Baba suddenly broke down a visitor's prejudices in some equally startling way. A Brahmin doctor was once taken to Shirdi, but warned his companion in advance that he would not bow down to Sai Baba, since he worshipped Sri Rama and no other. He stood outside the mosque, watching the Hindu ritual that was being performed inside, and then suddenly he rushed in and fell at Sai Baba's feet. When asked later what had made him change his mind, he said that he saw Sai Baba standing there in the form of Rama. This was not a case of rejection like the previous 2, but only of ignorant confinement of belief to one manifestation of God, and therefore merited guidance. Guidance was given, but the method of it was typical of Sai Baba. Another master might have explained that all gurus are one insofar as all manifest the one self and draw devotees back to the one. But in all things, Sai Baba was picturesque. He taught in symbols, not words. Therefore, instead of saying this, he demonstrated it, revealing himself in the form the visitor worshipped. This was by no means the only occasion when he gave such a demonstration. For instance, there was a similar case when a caste-proud Brahmin from Nasik. Before this man's arrival at Shirdi, Baba suddenly called out for some ochre dye to color his robe. However, he did not, in fact, dye it or wear ochre. He always wore white and continued to do so now. The Brahmin arrived and stood at some distance from the mosque for fear of pollution. Suddenly he rushed into the mosque and fell at Sai Baba's feet. He had seen there not Sai Baba, but his own ochre-robed guru. Once a devotee was won over, Sai Baba did not let go of him. He said, "When one of mine dies, even though it be 1,000 miles away, I draw him to myself, just as we draw a sparrow with a thread tied to its foot. I will not allow my man to get away from me. From me, from grace. It was giving, not taking, drawing back from distraction to unity, from the world to the spirit." Baba showed a detailed knowledge of the thoughts and actions of his devotees, past and present, at Shirdi and far away, that must have been disconcerting at times. And the word showed is not used conventionally here. He displayed it, flaunted it. A typical case, with its cogent humor, concerned over-rigid orthodoxy. Sai Baba did not approve of extremes of orthodoxy, such as refusal to eat onions. A devotee by name of S.B. Nachni tells the story, "I went to Shirdi in 1915 with a party that included my mother-in-law. We put up at Sathwada, as it was then called. It has since changed hands and become Navalkar Wada. Dada Kelkar was accompanying part of the premises. But my mother-in-law began cutting up onions to cook with our food. But Dada was strictly Orthodox Brahmin, who could not stand onions. He lost his temper and railed at my mother-in-law, and she took this very much to heart. A few hours later, Dada's granddaughter developed a severe pain in her eyes and began to cry. Dada went straight to Sai Baba and asked him to cure it. Sai Baba, who had been told nothing about the quarrel, told him to rub the child's eyes with onion. He asked where he was to get it from. Sai Baba always had some with him, and perhaps Dada hoped for some that he had touched. But instead he pointed to my mother-in-law and said, 'Get it from her.' What is noteworthy is that it has never for a moment entered the minds of the devotees to doubt that such a bizarre cure would work if prescribed by Sai Baba. On the arrival of a devotee, Sai Baba might regale the company with a story of what had happened to him, sometimes telling the story in the first person, identifying himself with the devotee, sometimes impersonally, not mentioning to whom it had happened. It might be a long and circumstantial story, or just a brief allusion. Of the latter type, there was an example with Adam Dalali, a Muslim follower. Sometime previously, poor Marwari had come to his house to ask for food, and he had been given 4 annas, quite enough for a meal in those days, and was sent to Marwari Hotel. When he went to Shirdi Sai Baba, immediately he said, "I went to this man's house, and he sent me to a Marwari hotel." It was in the healing of sickness that Sai Baba's powers were the most lavishly displayed. At first, he used to prescribe various herbs. Then one day he told the attendant who dispensed them not to bother about herbs anymore, but to give everyone the same medicine. For a while he gave sublimate of aluminum to all comers, and they were cured. After some time, however, the udi, or sacred ash from Sai Baba's fire, began to be used. Sai Baba himself often worked cures without any physical support, but at a distance his devotees used the sacred ash with effect, and still do. To record all Sai Baba's miraculous cures would be an impossible task. Almost every devotee has recollections of them, and even apart from those that took places before witnesses at Shirdi, there are those that were and still are affected at a distance through prayer to him. Here only a few typical ones are described. It will be seen that in some of them there is a fantastic display of power over and beyond the simple cure. Joseph, a Roman Catholic police officer, has recorded, "I never went to Shirdi, but I have heard of Sai Baba from friends, and I have his picture with me. I don't worship the picture, but I regard him as a saint. He has great power." In 1917, Norvikar fell ill. His son took 500 rupees and paid them to Baba. On receiving them, Baba began to shiver with fever. When I asked why, he said, "When we do anything for others, we have to take the bug and the burden and responsibility on ourselves." Soon after, Norvikar recovered from his fever. Joseph adds in his explanation that his patron saint is St. Francis Xavier, but that he prays to Sai Baba also, and his prayers are answered. Sai Baba's acceptance of money is such a case of another peculiar feature. Normally, a man who performs spiritual cures refuses all rewards. In some cases, the power leaves him if he takes rewards. Actually, there was no question of reward in Sai Baba's case, since he never kept the money. Nevertheless, his treatment of money was unusual and will be dealt with in a separate chapter. Deshpande, whose uncle had lacked faith, had a blind grandfather. In 1916, he took him to Shirdi and led him by hand to Sai Baba. The old man bowed down before him and simply said, "Baba, I can't see." "You will," Baba replied. "Give me 4 rupees. Again, the demand for money, though a ridiculous small sum. Deshpande went out to change a note, and when he returned with the 4 rupees, Sai Baba simply laid his hand on the old man's head, and his sight was restored. When he cried out in wonder and praise, Baba simply bade him to take the sacred ash and go. In leaving a holy man or a shrine, the taking of sacred ash is customary. Another case, perhaps more surprising, is recorded when a blind woman cried out, "Baba, I want to see you with these eyes." Immediately she was able to see, but no sooner did she go out from his presence than her blindness returned. What she asked for had been granted. In 1913, B.U. Bahalkar's little son had high fever for 5 or 6 days, and the doctor told him there was little hope. Bahalkar then sat down and prayed to Sai Baba. For the Hindu normally prays sitting cross-legged, not kneeling. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Sai Baba appeared in his room, applied the udi sacred ash to the child, and said, "There's no more need to worry. In 2 hours the boy will perspire, and in the morning he will feel better. When he is quite well, bring him to me." Of course, it happened as he said. This was on 3rd March in Bahalkar's house in Dhulya. 2 days later, he received a letter from Deshpande, who was staying at Shirdi, in which he wrote that Sai Baba had said to him, "I have been to your Dhulya's friend's house." Deshpande asked him what friend, and he replied, "Upasani Bahalkar. I go to his house daily. You had better write to him." Once, in a typically flamboyant style, Sai Baba said to Mahasamadhi, a resident devotee, "Your wife has a very painful tumor on her neck. I will cure it. No one else will cure it, only I." Mahasamadhi's wife was not at Shirdi at the time, and he did not even know that she had a tumor. Later he received a letter about it and its sudden cure. The following might be called a test case. M.W. Pradhan, a justice of peace, has related how his young son Babu fell ill. They had in their house a Telugu priest, who, as is not uncommon in well-to-do families, performed all the ritual worship for them. This priest, Madhava Bhatt, was strongly attached to the family, but was not a devotee of Sai Baba. On the contrary, he thought the child's sickness might be a punishment for worshipping one whom he considered a Moslem. He therefore asked the parents to go and make a vow to Datta, an aspect of God which they worshipped, and pray for the child's recovery. But they told him that Sai Baba was Datta. One night he saw in a dream a figure that he recognized from the picture in the house as Sai Baba, sitting at the top of the staircase, with a short stick in his hand. In the dream, Sai Baba said to him, "What do you mean? I am the lord of this house." Bhatt kept the dream to himself, but the child's condition continued to get worse. Finally, he could stand the strain no longer, and running to the picture of Sai Baba, he cried out, "If the child improves enough to be brought downstairs by 4 o'clock this afternoon, I will agree that you are Datta." The temperature began to go down, and by 4 o'clock the boy himself asked his mother to take him downstairs and let him play. And finally a case where the sickness was not merely cured but foreseen. SSD Nimonakar, a police inspector, was on his way from Pune to Naiman, where his brother's wife had recently given birth to a child. He stopped at Shirdi on the way to see Sai Baba. As he was taking leave, Sai Baba gave him the usual sacred ash, saying to him, "Save the child's life." On his arrival at Naiman, he found the newborn child all but dead. Breathing had almost stopped, and the parents had lost hope. He looked for the sacred ash that he had been given, but could not find it. He must have lost it on the way. Nevertheless, he took the child on his lap and prayed to Sai Baba for help. And within 15 minutes, the crisis had passed, and the child began to recover. Sai Baba's help was also manifested frequently in giving issue to the childless. As with most things, the method was symbolical. Usually he would give a coconut in token of fertility, sometimes some other fruit. On one occasion it was the breaking of a coconut, and he showed reluctance, several times putting it aside, until at last a devotee persuaded him. D.S. Rasani, having no children, married a second wife, but this marriage also remained barren. It should be explained in parentheses that even before the new law forbidding polygamy, the enormous majority of Hindus were monogamous. But if a man had no son to perform the funeral rites for him, he could take as a second wife with the consent of the first. One day on Rasani's arrival at Shirdi, Sai Baba immediately handed him 4 mangoes and, addressing him by the diminutive of his first name, said, "Damia, take these mangoes, eat them, and die." Symbolical as usual, Rasani was taken aback until it was explained to him by others that there had to be beget a son is equivalent to dying and being replaced by another. To plunge into the life of the world is death. To remain calm and aloof is life. Baba continued, "Don't eat them yourself, give them to your wife." Which wife? He asked. The second. Let her eat them, and she will have 2 sons. The first is to be named Daulat Shah, and the second Thana Shah. Later, Sai Baba told him that he would have 8 children in all, which proved true. On the birth of his first son, he came to Sai Baba and asked what name to give it. Despite all the people he had met and all that had happened between, Sai Baba instantly replied, "Have you forgotten what I told you? You wrote it on page 3 of your notebook. Didn't I tell you he was to be called Daulat Shah?" There was a complicated case with one Sapata Nekar extending over many years. A spiritual master has enormous patience. It is no use trying to pick unripe fruit, and he will wait patiently through the years for it to ripen. Sai Baba was first brought to Sapata Nekar's notice when the latter was a young man taking his law examinations. He turned to a friend who was notoriously weak in studies, and rather unkindly asked him how he expected to fare. The friend replied with complete confidence that he would pass because he had Sai Baba's assurance. Sapata Nekar made fun both of his friend and Sai Baba and predicted the worst. Actually, the friend did pass, but Sapata Nekar was not convinced. He regarded it as a lucky chance. He himself passed, set up as a lawyer, married, and had a son. 10 years later, his son died, and he had no other child. He remembered the way he had spoken about Sai Baba and began to worry about it, wondering whether his son's death was in retribution. He decided to go and see him and apologize. Sai Baba, however, shouted roughly at him and drove him away, right at his first sight. Again he came and bowed down, and again he was driven away. About a year later, however, Sai Baba appeared to his wife in a dream and invited them both to him. And this time Sapata Nekar was received graciously and apologized for his past contempt. Sai Baba then turned to someone who was standing by and told the story of Sapata Nekar's life in the first person, as though it was his own. Then pointing to him said, "This man blames me because he thinks I killed his son. But now I am going to bring that same soul back into his wife's womb." When he was taking leave, Sai Baba gave him a coconut and bade him to tie it to his wife's shawl and go away rejoicing. A year later, he brought to Sai Baba the child that had been born. Another devotee, L.G. Mungi, had several children, but they all died in infancy. He went to Sai Baba and complained of his misfortune, praying for one son that would live. Baba immediately replied, "Why do you ask me for one? I'll give you 2. And in fact, he got 2 sons and 2 daughters. But a condition for granting these favors was faith and submission. We have seen in the case of Sapata Nekar how Sai Baba waited until the submission had matured, and now an instance where it was lacking. It was sometime in 1910. Suddenly, one morning, Sai Baba burst out, "What is the scoundrel coming to see me for? What have I got? I'm just a naked fakir with human organs like anyone else." It was one of those outbursts when no one knew what he was referring to. A little later, however, a couple of official carriages drew up with their escort outside the mosque. The wife of the district revenue commissioner, an English lady, had long hoped for a child, and now thought she would try the wonder-working fakir whom all the Indians were talking about. She was accompanied by her husband and by the collector, a title which in British India signified the local administrative officer of the district. They looked around uneasily. This bare, primitive environment was no setting for members of the ruling race. The assistant commissioner who had accompanied them saw a devotee waiting about in the yard outside the mosque, and calling to him, bade him ask Sai Baba to finish his morning routine quickly, as the sahibs wished to speak to him. The devotee was aghast, Binding as the word of a Sahib was, he could not take such a message to Sai Baba. He did not even pretend to do so, but declared outright that it was impossible. If they had any business with Sai Baba, they must wait his pleasure. It was half an hour before he was free and came. The lady stepped up to him and, bowing, said politely, "We wish to have a little talk with you, Maharaj." However, such politeness was not enough for Sai Baba. It was not the heartfelt devotion he required. And so he said roughly, "You must wait half an hour. I have to go and beg." All his life, however much wealth flowed in, Sai Baba retained his custom of begging his food. Actually, he went only to a few houses which considered it an honor to feed him, and sometimes he delegated a devotee to beg for him. To make the white sahibs wait while a fakir begged his food was a lesson in humility, typical of his bizarre humor. Also, it was open to them to remove the necessity for begging by contributing or obtaining supplies for him if they had thought of doing so. It was not half an hour, but only 10 minutes later when he returned. Again the lady bowed and repeated her request. "Wait an hour longer," Sai Baba replied. The officers of government had not the time, nor were they disposed to be made fools of in this way by a mere fakir. They got into their carriages and rode away, and the lady remained childless. Cures for the sick and the children for the barren were the most frequent benefits. But whether it was an examination to pass, a job to obtain, a lawsuit to win, or a marriage to arrange, devotees would appeal to Sai Baba, and if the request for aid was made with faith and sincerity, it was likely to be granted. "So much can easily be said of Sai Baba," said G.G. Narki, by mere observers from the outside. Narki, a professor of geology at the Deccan Gymkhana College of Engineering, and a devotee to whom we shall often have to refer for a deeper interpretation of Sai Baba, said, "But anyone who judged him from the outside like this was very far out in his appraisal. Baba was, of course, adapting himself to the capacity for understanding of the people who came to him for help and protection. Most of them were superficial and sought only material benefits, and to them he did not reveal his inner nature. But when anyone capable of diving deeper came to him, he revealed more of himself and his true powers." Sometimes in performing a miracle, Baba would say, "I will do this." More often, however, his reply would be, "Allah acha karika," God will put it right, or Allah Malik Hai, God is the ruler. It was a peculiar custom of his to refer to God as the fakir, and when refusing a request, he would often say, "The fakir will not let me do that," or "I can only do what the fakir orders me to do." He often did refuse. Sometimes he would explain that to prolong the life of a sick person would only cause prolonged suffering. Sometimes he would promise to bring him back in a new birth. Sometimes, when asked to bless with issue, he would say that there was no child in that person's destiny. Not that this always deterred him, for at least on one occasion he granted a child out of his own destiny, declaring that there was none in that of the petitioner. Sometimes he would give no explanation at all, but simply refuse, saying, "Allah Malik Hai," or "the fakir will not let me." V.A. Patel was a landowner and revenue officer. His aged father had a stroke. He went to Sai Baba to ask for udi, the sacred ash, for him. But Sai Baba said, "I will not give you udi. Allah Malik Hai." 3 days later, the father died. This Patel was very proud of his physical strength. It was in 1913, when Sai Baba was already old and frail, and Patel would often massage his legs and then pick him up bodily and carry him to the fire. One day, soon after his father's death, he tried to do this, but was utterly unable to move him. Baba laughed at him, and Patel records, "He taught me two things, not to be proud of my strength and not to grieve for my father." Sai Baba said to him, "Why should you grieve? In 5 months' time, he will return." In 5 months, a son was born to Patel. There is a plain meaning that this was the rebirth of his father, or the profounder meaning that the life force which had taken on a form to which he was attached would do so again, since he had failed to destroy attachment at its roots. A woman's young son was bitten by a cobra, and she cried out and begged Sai Baba for udi, but he did not give it, and the child died. H.S. Dixit, one of the oldest of the devotees, implored him, "Baba, her crying is heart-rending. For my sake, revive her son." Here again, as in the incident of curing a child's eyes with onion, it is striking to see that there was never the slightest doubt that he could do this. And Sai Baba replied, "Do not get entangled in this. What has happened is for the best. He has entered another body in which he can do specially good work, which he could not do in this one. If I draw him back into this body, then the new one he has entered will have to die for this to live. I might do it for your sake, but have you considered the consequences? Have you any idea of the responsibility, and are you prepared to assume it?" Death to one form is always birth to another, except in the case of the jnani, the fully enlightened or self-realized sage, who passes beyond forms to the formless infinite, which is spoken of as moksha or nirvana. S.B. Mohil had a daughter with a hare lip and took her to Sai Baba, hoping he would cure her. As soon as he arrived, Sai Baba said, "I know what you have come for, but it would be useless. The girl is of divine nature, and her life on earth will be short. Next, Nagashuddha Chaturi Day, she will die. If you go to your office on that day and do not stay at home, you will not see her again." It happened so. She died on that day while her father, who had ignored the warning, was at his office. At least one case is recorded when Sai Baba wrestled in vain for a life. There was an outbreak of bubonic plague in the Nugaj village, and the wife of Patil, or a squire, had fallen ill. Sai Baba was passing that night at the Shavadi, or rest house, with Mahapasti in attendance. And Baba said, "Don't sleep tonight. Stand and keep watch for me the whole night, because I have to pray to God. That ruffian," referring to the plague, "wants to kill the woman, so I am praying to Allah." Mahasamadhi kept watch through the night to prevent any disturbance, but just before morning an official arrived with a body of servants. They made a great commotion, shouting that their master wanted darshan with Sai Baba. Mahasamadhi tried to quiet them by giving them the sacred ash, but in vain. Sai Baba burst forth from the rest house in a raging temper. Shouting and abusing Mahasamadhi, he cried, "Are you the father of a family? Don't you know what is happening in Nigaj? Why do you admit people at such a time?" Then suddenly he was calm. "So be it. What has happened is right." And that morning the Patil's wife died. Despite the many favors he granted, Sai Baba could be a hard master. There were few who escaped his blows or abuse, and it was not necessary for a selfish thought to crystallize in speech or action for it to be punished. The thought itself was enough. A devotee has told how he was sitting there when someone brought a present of pink bananas, a variety with a rare flavor that grow only at a certain altitude in the hills. Seeing Sai Baba peeling them and giving them away, he felt an involuntary fear that they would all be finished before his turn came. Sai Baba immediately peeled another, gave it to someone else, and threw him the skin, bidding him to eat that. He did so, accepting it meekly as a punishment for his greed. Sai Baba was pleased at this and said, while peeling another banana, a Muslim woman who kept purdah bowed down at Sai Baba's feet, unveiling her face. A devotee sitting beside him observed how beautiful she was and felt a hope that she would show her face again. Without a word, Sai Baba swung round and dealt him a blow with his stick. A leper clambered slowly up the steps to the mosque. He was filthy and almost naked, covered with sores and stinking of rotting flesh. His feet were affected by the disease, so it seemed to take ages for him to approach Sai Baba and prostrate himself before him. Then he turned to go, and when at last he was down the steps, the elegant Mrs. Mannlicher felt a wave of relief. Sai Baba sent a devotee to call him back. Again the slow clambering of the steps, the tottering nearer, the foul stench. This time, as he prostrated himself, Sai Baba picked up a dirty cloth bundle that he had been carrying and opened it. "Milk sweets, good." He took one, and of all those present, gave one to Mrs. Mannlicher. Such was her devotion that she ate it without diminution. One test of faith was when devotees were not allowed to leave Shirdi on the date they had planned. It was a practice, as with any other guru, to ask permission to leave, but he did not always grant it. The devotee's leave of absence was due to expire, or if he had some business or other appointment, and this could be very awkward. None ever suffered by it. Somehow matters turned out so that no harm was done, but great faith was needed to believe that beforehand. H.V. Sathi has related a typical instance. He was serving on a committee with the revenue commissioner, of whom we have already heard, and the collector. They were due to meet in Manmad and set out from there on a tour of inspection. On the day before they were to meet, Sathi sent his father-in-law to Sai Baba to ask leave for him to depart. But Sai Baba refused. Sathi told his father-in-law that he could not trifle with important official engagements, or he might be thrown out of government service altogether. Again the elder man went to ask permission, and again Sai Baba refused, even ordering him to lock Sathi in his room if he tried to go. It was 3 days before he was allowed to leave for Manmad. On arrival there, he found that the other members of the committee had altered the original program and postponed the meeting. On the strength of the original program, he had ordered his tent and equipment to be sent to Manmad, but by a strange inadvertence, this had not been done. So by my detention at Shirdi, he said, I lost absolutely nothing except my peace of mind and was saved a lot of unnecessary trouble and enabled to spend more time with my family and with Sai Baba. Of course, Sai Baba knew and arranged all this, but in my ignorance. I was very uneasy about staying at Shirdi. Such instances strengthen one's faith in Sai Baba and reliance on him. It can further be added that if his faith had been stronger, he would not have lost his peace of mind. It was quite safe to stay at Shirdi when Sai Baba ordered it. It was by leaving without permission that a man invited trouble. The following case of Abdullah Rahim Sashuddin Rangari, a Muslim devotee, illustrates that. He said, in 1913 there was a plague at Thana, where I lived, and also I think at Shirdi. My wife had been suffering for a month from some disease. Her throat and cheeks were swollen, and she could not eat anything. She was taking medicine, but it did not help her. A Hindu neighbor, R.G. Gupta, a lawyer, advised me to take her to Sai Baba at Shirdi, as that would cure her. When we started out, she was unable to swallow anything. But by the time we reached Igatpuri, she could take tea, and by Nasik, she could eat something. This was a good omen. She was improving rapidly. On reaching Shirdi, I went to the mosque and I bowed down before Sai Baba. He asked me in Hindustani where I had come from and why, and told me to bring my wife to the mosque. I took her up the steps and she bowed before him. He put his hand on her head and said, Kuda Aki Karika. God will put it right. I gave him 1 rupee and 4 annas without being asked, and he accepted it and gave me udi. I stayed there for 2 hours. My wife's swelling was subsiding fast, so we started back without taking leave of Sai Baba. He had told me to stay, but since a cure had been effected, I thought we might as well start. I did not like to stay in strange places longer than necessary, especially with my wife and 2-year-old son. The Tonga, the carriage in which we had come, was still in the village, so we took it and started back for Koparagan, about 6 miles away. We had gone about half the distance when the axle of the Tonga broke, and we were left stranded on the road. It was about 10 o'clock at night, and there was no traffic. We could neither walk forward nor back such a distance at night. It was a lonely road, and our predicament was unenviable, exposed to the night weather and in danger of highwaymen who infested the roads. We repented now our disregard of Sai Baba's words. 2 hours passed in this way, and then we heard the rattle of a carriage approaching and a voice calling out, Where is the fellow from Thana? A Tonga came up to us, and seeing that it was the driver who was calling out, I told him that I was from Thana and asked how he knew our plight and happened to arrive there at such an unusual hour. He said that Sai Baba had sent him. What for? I asked him. To fetch you, he replied. So we got into the Tonga and went back to Shirdi. It was between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning when we arrived there. Baba was waiting for us at the mosque. He said, You left without permission. That's why you had this trouble.